Section 63 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ashley M. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 8, Chapter 16, Spheres of Action, Miscellaneous Business, Part 3. Personation of Officials. In the universal dread inspired by the Holy Office, the temptation was great to personate its agents, and to extort money as the price for forbearance, for no one ventured to question the authority or acts of any stranger who presented himself as an official. The opportunities thus afforded were speedily recognized and utilized. As early as 1487, at Saragossa, a special auto was held, April 1st, at which appeared a cleric who had pretended to be an inquisitor and as such had made an arrest. The penalty inflicted is not recorded, but evidently the opportunity was taken to make an impressive warning. The systematic writers assume that in these cases there should be careful consideration of the injury afflicted, for the pretender may deserve exemplary punishment. The usual offense is asserting that there are accusations and that he will save the accused from prosecution. For this he must refund the money received, appear in an auto, and suffer 200 lashes and 5 years of galley service. If the imposture is assumed only to escape from some trouble and causing no damage, there is some penalty of fine or exile. If there has only been an assertion of official position, the penalty is very light and secret. Other authorities tell us that, if the culprit is of a low class, he has 200 lashes and 4 years of galleys, more or less according to the gravity of the offense. If he is noble or rich, he is fined 1 or 2,000 ducats and serves for 2 or 3 years, without pay, as a gentleman in the galleys, or against the Moors or heretics. Evidently, in an offense which varies so much in motive and result, much was necessarily left to the discretion of the tribunal, and a few cases will serve to indicate the different methods of operating and the deterrent penalties inflicted. In the Seville auto of September 24, 1559, there were 3 cases of personation. Alonso de Hontiveros, for pretending to be a familiar and endeavoring to make arrest for the purpose of extortion, appearing with halter and gag, and was sent to Xeres, his place of residence, to receive 100 lashes. Juan de Aragon of Malaga, for the same offense, was spared the gag, but wore a mitra and had a scourging at Malaga and another where his offense was committed, besides 2 years of exile, while his accomplice, Francisco Pietro, received the same sentence, with the substitution of vergüenza for scourging. On the other hand, at Toledo, in 1581, Francisco de la Batida was visited with the utmost rigor. He represented himself as an alguazil, carrying a vara de justicia and using the name of the Inquisitor General. He would summon the alcaldes and other officials to render assistance, which was freely given without question. He would make arrests, carry his prisoners to some distance, take their money, leave them in charge of some local familiar, and disappear. In this way he moved from Puente de Alsina to Almaden and Madrid, and thence to Saragossa, where he was arrested. He confessed freely at once and was condemned to relaxation, by virtue of a special brief obtained from Gregory XIII, but the Suprema, with doubtful mercy, commuted this to 600 lashes, 200 each in Toledo, Almaden, and Fuente de Enzina, and the galleys irremissibly for life. Zapata relates what is evidently the exploit which brought to a close the promising career of this enterprising knave. Almagro, he says, the agent of the Fuggers at Augsburg, was Juan Zelder, a man highly esteemed and reputed to be of great wealth. Suddenly a stranger appeared, with the vara of an alguazil of the Inquisition, who sought out 2 familiars and commanded them to assist him in making an arrest. Proceeding to Zelder's house, he made the arrest, locked him up in a room, and consoled the frightened family by assuring them of the customary mercy of the Inquisition. He then summoned a notary and placed all the property of the prisoner under sequestration, except 2,000 ducats which he said he had orders to take for the expenses of the trial. The whole town was thrown into commotion, but no one dared to ask for papers, or authority, or identification. Zelder was placed in a carriage with strict orders that no one should exchange a word with him. The familiars were required to accompany it to the next halting place, where they and the carriage were dismissed with handsome gratuities, and the stranger confided Zelder to the care of a familiar of high standing, with orders to guard him carefully incommunicado, while he would proceed to Toledo and send instructions. 10 days passed when the familiar, growing tired of the expense, made inquiries and ascertaining the facts released the prisoner. Meanwhile the impostor, fearing to carry the gold, deposited it with a banker and took a bill of exchange on Saragossa, so that he was readily tracked and arrested when he presented the bill for payment. The secular court claimed him, but the Inquisition asserted its jurisdiction, fortunately, Zapata says, for the culprit, for the offense was capital and he escaped with scourging and the galleys. Another method of speculation on the fears and hopes of the defenseless appears in the case of Geronimo Roche, son of the secretary of the University of Lerida. He pretended to be an official, to have much influence with the tribunal, and to hold faculties to remit 4 sanbenitos and to appoint 4 familiars. He approached a Morisca who, with her 3 daughters, had been reconciled, and offered to relieve her of the sanbenito for 200 ducats, and those of her 3 daughters if one of them would abandon herself to him. He was forbidden the house, but he persisted in writing letters of mingled threats and love. For this he appeared in the Saragossa auto of June 6, 1585, where he was sentenced to vergiienza and 8 years in the galleys, being spared the scourging in consideration of his father. There appears to have been a very lenient view taken, in 1582, by the Toledo tribunal of the case of Pedro Moreno, a sacristan, who pretended to be a familiar and as such visited the hospital and asked the inmates whether they had confessed, when he arrested and carried off those who had not. It was in evidence also that, on seeing 2 men quarreling in a church, he arrested one in the name of the Inquisition. There does not seem to have been a pecuniary motive in these eccentricities, and he escaped with a reprimand and banishment for a year. Another motive, which was regarded with a lenient eye, was assuming official position in order to enjoy exemptions and privileges of the Inquisition. Thus when Jaime Corvalana of Barcelona in this manner bluffed out the officers of justice who came to his house to seize some salt, Inquisitor Padilla imposed on him a fine of 50 ducats and some spiritual penance, and was rebuked by the Suprema for inflicting so heavy a penalty for so trifling a cause, on cosas tan livianas. Personation was by no means uncommon, but I am convinced that Laurent is mistaken when he says that there rarely was an auto in which someone was not punished for this offense. In the Toledo record from 1575 to 1610 the number of cases is only 13, and, in the same tribunal, from 1648 to 1794 they amount only to 4. Principal interest in these cases is the evidence which they afford of the terror inspired by the Inquisition, the very name of which seemed to paralyze, so that no one, whether magistrate or individual, dared to question the authority of any impostor who assumed to represent it. And this same terror doubtless is the reason why this apparently facile method of trading on popular fear was not more frequently exploited. It required more than common nerve to incur the risk of inquisitorial vengeance. Somewhat akin to this was the levying of blackmail by threats and denunciation. No doubt there was a good deal of this, in which the victims prudently suffered in silence, rather than to draw upon themselves the attention of the dreaded tribunal. It was a matter of which the Inquisition took cognizance, but the only case which I have happened to meet is that of Pedro Jacome Pramaceltes, who was sentenced by the Toledo tribunal in 1666 to 3 years of galley service for astrology and had his term extended to 5 for attempts at extortion in this manner. Demoniacal possession. That evil spirits can take possession of a human being, deprive him of his free will, and subject him to extreme bodily and mental suffering is a belief handed down from ancient times and still largely held as a matter of faith. That relief can be had by the ministrations of an exorcist, duly authorized by admission into one of the lower orders of the priesthood. Is a corresponding belief, and formulas without number have been prepared to enable him to exercise his power over the demon. There is no heresy involved in either the possession or the exorcism, and, under normal conditions, there was no call for interference by the Inquisition, but when, for any reason, such interference was desired, there was little trouble in finding pretext for its jurisdiction. We have seen, Volume 2, page 135, the active measures taken, in 1628, with the nuns of San Placito, whose demoniacally inspired revelations were somewhat revolutionary. Greater self-denial was exhibited by the Valladolid tribunal in a contemporaneous case, when a Jesuit confessor reported to it that Doña Felipa and Doña Ana de Mercado, Bernardine nuns in Santo Espiritu of Olmeda, made gestures and other irreverent acts of confession and communion, which caused scandal, and he thought proceeded from demoniacal possession. The tribunal felt doubts as to its jurisdiction, and consulted the Suprema, which submitted the matter to a calificador of high attainments. Prolonged investigations were made, other nuns were examined, and it was in evidence that the two inculpated were women of exceptional virtue and piety who had prayed to God to test them with afflictions. The case dragged on for more than 10 years, resulting in the conviction that it was undoubtedly one of possession, for which the nuns were free from blame, and finally, April 16, 1630, the Suprema ordered its suspension. Wherever there was the faintest suspicion of heresy, the Inquisition could assert jurisdiction. This involved the question of the responsibility of the demoni for his utterances, which was somewhat intricate. In the case of one under trial by the Granada tribunal, in 1650, the learned Jesuit, Padre Diego Tello, who was called in as a calificador, reported, with an immense array of authorities, and after 3 visits to the accused in the secret prison, that there could be no doubt as to the possession, for he was able to discuss points of theology and other matters far beyond his capacity. He could also speak Latin intelligibly, and he quoted Scripture while, as he uttered many heresies, it was evident that the spirit was evil. At the same time he was rational on so many points that he could not be regarded as irresponsible for the heresies. Luther and Zwingli, he added, were notoriously possessed by demons, but they were none the less held responsible for their teachings, and it was the uniform practice of the Inquisition so to decide in these cases. In the hysterical epidemics which formed so notable a feature of possession, the Inquisition was apt to be called in and was ready to act, although it would be difficult to determine on what grounds. In 1638 there was such an epidemic in one of the Pyrenean valleys and, on September 24th, Jacinto de Robles, secretary of the governor of Aragon, reported to the Saragossa tribunal that, on a recent visit to Jaca, he had found, in the Val de Tena, that there were about 60 endemoniadas, and that the malady was spreading. It was attributed to Pedro de Arecibo and his friend Miguel Guillen, who had been seized by the secular authorities. Guillen had been executed, while Arecibo's trial was nearly concluded. He had confessed that a Frenchman had given him a paper and some conjurations through which to win women, but it only rendered them possessed, a statement evidently fabricated to satisfy his torturers. It was the demons who had accused these 2 men, adding that their death would not stay the infection, for there were other accomplices. The women affected were of the best families, their ages ranging from 7 to 18. Some were pregnant and others were suckling their infants, for demons were able to produce these results in the virtuous. The Bishop of Jaca and some Jesuits were exhausting their exorcisms, and an inquisitor was badly needed. What function was expected of an inquisitor is not stated, but the Suprema was consulted and, after some delay, it appealed to the king. It was ready to send an inquisitor and 4 frailes, but it had no funds for the expenses of the latter, which would have to be defrayed from some other source. The king gave orders accordingly, but they were not obeyed, and the last we hear of the matter is another consulta of March 28, 1640, in which he was urged to speedy action in view of the great importance of the affair. The intervention of the Inquisition might well be welcomed if it was always as rational and as effective as in an epidemic of the kind which troubled Querétaro, Mexico, in 1691. Two young girls who had suffered themselves to be seduced pretended to be possessed. The Franciscans and Padres Apostolico took them in hand, exorcising them at night in the churches with the most impressive ceremonies, which spread the contagion until there were 14 patients and the community was thoroughly excited. It would doubtless have extended much further, but fortunately the Dominicans, the Jesuits, and the Carmelites, jealous of the rival orders, pronounced the whole to be an imposture. The two factions denounced each other from the pulpits, the people took sides, and passions grew so hot that severe disturbances were impending. Both factions appealed to the Inquisition, which submitted the matter to calificadores. These decided that the demoniacal possession was fraudulent, and that the blasphemies and sacrilegious acts of the ermines and the violent sermons of the friars were justifiable by the Inquisition. With great good sense the tribunal issued a decree, January 9, 1692, ordering the cessation of all exorcism and of all discussion, whether in the pulpit or in private. The excitement forthwith died away and the energumens, left to themselves, for the most part recovered their senses. Prosecutions were commenced against 4 of them and against the Franciscan Fray Mateo de Bonilla, which seemed to have been suspended after a few years. One of the girls, however, who had caught the infection, had her nervous system too profoundly impressed for recovery. She continued under the inspection of the Inquisition, gradually sinking into a condition of confirmed hypochondria, until we lose sight of her in 1704. Cases of imposture were not infrequent. Whether this in itself rendered the impostor liable to prosecution by the Inquisition may be doubted, but, in the deception, she was very apt to commit acts or utter blasphemies which brought her under its jurisdiction. Thus, in 1796, we find the Valencia tribunal prosecuting Benito Gargori, a pretended demoniac, and Francisca Sidnes, an accomplice, for irreligious actions and utterances. The exorciser occasionally laid himself open to inquisitorial animadversion. Thus, in 1749, Fray Jaime Sons, a lay brother of the Order of San Francisco de Asís, used to visit the sick and pronounce them to be possessed, when he would make the sign of the cross and sprinkle them with holy water. He was denounced to the Barcelona tribunal, which warned him to desist, for he had no power to exorcise, and threatened to proceed against him, whereupon he promised to obey. Exorcists also sometimes abused their opportunities by committing indecencies upon their patients. I have not met with such cases in the Spanish Inquisition, but in this it would doubtless follow the example of the Roman Congregation, which, in 1639, ordered the prosecution of a most flagrant one, reported by the Inquisitor of Bergamo. Considered as a whole, the influence of the Inquisition must have been decidedly beneficial in restraining the development of this disease, for experienced inquisitors recognized that the methods usually adopted only aggravated it. Cardinal Scaglia, in treating of these epidemics among nuns, remarks that the superiors, not content with exorcisms, commence prosecutions, examine witnesses and interrogate the pretended criminals suggestively and assertively, and threaten them with torture, thus extracting whatever confessions they desire and creating still greater disturbance in the convent and the city. End of section 63. Recording by Ashley M.